Thanks for tuning in and attending. This is our final session of the day, which we're talking about property taxes these next few months in the legislative session. Real quick, I wanted to say this session is supported by Texas 2036 and the Texas Cattle Feeders Association. Joining us today, we have State Senator Paul Bettencourt, a Republican representing Houston. Before he joined the legislature in 2015, he had served as Harris County Tax Assessor Collector and is the chair of the Senate Local Government Committee. And also with us is State Senator Sarah Eckhardt, Democrat representing Austin. Before she was elected to the Senate in 2020, she was Travis County Judge for 5 years and is also on the Local Government Committee. Thanks for joining us, Sal.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here, Josh.
I'm hoping you guys are going to have a little bit, there's going to be some sparks here, so.
What, are you like taking fight promotion, from Evan Smith 101? What's this?
And you might actually be disappointed because laying politics aside, Paul and I agree on a lot.
Shocking.
So that's what I like to hear.
That's right, shocking, because it's the Local Government Committee. So, Josh, we can expand from property taxes to all things local government. Okay, if it helps
I love that.
All
right. So obviously, Texas homeowners, renters, and business owners, they pay some of the highest property taxes in the country. That's a product of how much we rely on property taxes to fund everything from police to sidewalks to, of course, public schools. State lawmakers have tried to tame the growth of property taxes in recent years, and then have had some success at it. But obviously, property taxes remain high. So, I wanted to just open up real quick with, what is sort of the groundwork, what is left to do this session, and what are y'all looking for?
Well, let's break some news from the Local Government Committee of the Senate. Sarah, what do you think? The average homestead tax bill in Travis County is actually down this year for the first time. All right? Yeah, no, give everybody a hand for that one. All right? Now, if you don't believe me, go look at your bill, okay, that you get and flip it over on the back side, and you can see what's been happening over time, and you can compare to year. But basically, you're right, Josh, in Austin, because of the high property values, Representative Howard knows that this is about $9,343 average tax bill for an average homestead in Travis County. And I'm using the city, and the various other departments, Austin ISD, et cetera, as part of this calculation. Now, it would have been a little bit higher than last year, but we also passed a bill that Sarah voted for, which is Senate Bill 8, which allowed people to get credit for their homestead exemption when they first buy a home. Then this was a real problem because when people were buying homes, especially in the gentrifying areas, they were generally buying for people that had over 65 exemptions. And I'll let Sarah expound on that because they're very low, okay? And so when a new person came in, Josh, your age, you buy a home, okay? And then you get a bill at the end of the year and it's a shock. I mean, it's thousands of dollars, some cases $10,000 more. We stopped that with SB 8. But the really good news is that House Bill 3, which everyone here voted for, Senate Bill 2, Proposition 2 that the voters passed here at about 86%, which increased the homestead exemption, all that rolled into, for the first time, even with a 51% increase in appraised value, homestead tax bills are actually slightly down. It's an astonishing thing that's happened. On average, it's a great thing, and it's something that I've been working for years, along with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and everybody else that's voted for all these bills.
Do you have anything to add on that?
Definitely. So first of all, I'd like to set some context here, as I think this room, looking around this room, y'all already know this, that since the state of Texas has no income tax, we are heavily reliant on sales tax, oil and gas taxes, and property taxes. And even with the, well, I should say even without the 2019 changes in property taxes, the percentage of property tax bill compared to income for the average Texan is below 5%. So I just wanted to put that in context with regard to income tax versus property tax. And also what Paul said is absolutely true. We are seeing a moment where the average property tax for the average property owner in the city of Austin and Travis County is down this year. The reason why it's down is because of the incredible growth. Even before the property tax changes at the legislative level, Travis County, and I can attest to this because I was with Travis County for 20 years, marked to market an effective that was less than 4%, a tax rate that was less than 4% above effective. We did not want to go above 3% if we could help it. And when there was a growth year, we were below 3%. So we were below the capped 3.5% that was created in statute. I know that that's super wonky, but this is a pretty wonky crowd. So in 2015, even without this legislation, Travis County brought a tax rate in that was less than 3% above effective and resulted in a smaller average tax bill for the average Travis County homeowner. Local entities don't want to take money out of your pocket, but we pay, the state gives us only one mechanism for most of these local governmental entities, and that is property tax. So if we're going to have sustainable long-term property tax relief, the state of Texas needs to buy it down with a different sustainable funding source. Because our population is growing, our needs are growing, and the cost of addressing those needs in infrastructure, education, healthcare, courts facilities, all of that that need is growing and the cost to provide it is increasing. And we need to be realistic about that.
And Josh, if I could add, I just want to make it as the Aggie in the audience here, okay? I just want to explain it that everybody knows what we're doing is as values go up, okay, we're pushing tax rates down. Because there's a tremendous amount of appraisal growth out there. Now, when Sarah was there, and back in the county, because that's when I kind of first knew about her, because they were actually helping out their homeowners, especially homesteads, by trying to keep that trimmed out to where their homesteads weren't paying more on a year-to-year basis. But not everybody was doing that. Now, for this year's example, to get to this point, the city cut their tax rate by 9 pennies, the county by 4, and the ISD is in between. So what happens is that while you've got tax values going up, you've got this push down of tax rates, which is where the relief is coming from. And to your point about buying it down, the school buy down is the important part because that's going to be over $5 billion now in a biennium, and that's what's allowing the bottom floor tax rates, where it's called maintenance and operation, to come down every year as this value growth goes up. And the good news is it means people aren't getting blown out of their homes, okay, well, especially their homesteads, and that's because that's the critical point of where we saw this problem. So the good news is, yes, it's really happening. On average, you've got a nice Christmas gift. It's not a lump of coal. Same thing's happening in Bexar County and in Harris and Houston. It's actually, there's like a $200 cut, but there was a big fight at county government, and the one faction effectively, 2 commissioners forced a no new revenue rate. And that saved some money there too. And Sarah, you don't even know this, but of all the big urban areas, there is one county that's the most Republican that has the highest percentage increase. Guess who that is?
Which one?
Donna? Bingo. Bing, 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 bing. Representative Howard wins, okay? All right. So yes, Tarrant County has the highest rate of increase of 4.4% on homesteads. Everybody else is either negative or much lower, but they didn't want to cut the tax rate. See, that's the big difference, okay? All right, and look, this is all about setting priorities, But, and that's what government needs to do with our money. And importantly, but this doesn't happen very often. And we've now, when I first got into office, and even before Sarah joined the committee, because she was in county government, I did 10 years of county government back in the aughts, which makes me really old. We were already number 3 in the highest tax rate in the country. We were chasing Illinois and New Jersey. And I don't care what political model you're with, whether Republican or Democrat, those aren't the 2 most efficient states to be chasing. And we have fallen down to 6th or 7th. And after this year's results, we'll actually fall down to the 10th highest tax rate in the country. That's my prediction. But great news for everybody that's been holding on to their homesteads.
But I want to put that in context, though. It's true. We have among the highest property tax burden in the United States. But if you go to the Tax Institute, which is a federal for-profit think tank that is nonpartisan, and you look at combined state and local property tax burden per capita, we're actually, I believe, 40-something in the combined state and local tax burden. And the reason for that
You don't have an income tax.
Well, we don't have an income tax, and the state pays for less and less every year. So when you consider for public education, for instance, the state pays about 44 cents to every 56 cents that your local school district pays. With regard to public health, you all probably well know, we are the least insured in the United States. We don't accept the Medicaid expansion, and the increment between what it actually costs to provide indigent health care and what is paid by the state is made up by hospital districts. In indigent defense and in court systems, which are the responsibility of the state, y'all, local governments, mostly counties, as the arm of the state, the agent of the state, pays roughly 80 cents to every 20 cents the state puts in for criminal and civil courts indigent defense. So as you can see, local governments pick up more and more of the cost of state services. So I would suggest that rather than blaming the horse, we blame the rider and have the rider, the state, invest in our prosperity long term. That would be the biggest property tax relief, is if the state would structurally fund statewide needs.
So there you've got difference number 1 for the day, because I don't want to ever get near a statewide property tax system. Would be grossly complicated and difficult to do because we have roughly 4,300 taxing jurisdictions in the state. But the good news is that we've taken some pretty decent steps to solve a problem that's been a really big one for a while, at least give everybody a breathing spell. And we'll see with all this money that we have, and we'll talk about that later. I'm sure that's on your wish list to talk about as well. So go ahead, fire away. Next question.
Yeah, I don't think I've asked a question in maybe 15 minutes.
Well, then welcome to a Senate hearing on local government committee.
No, this is what I expected.
We barely let Donna speak, and she visits regularly.
No, but if indulge me for a moment, if the Texas legislature, and this would be a controversial notion, I'm sure, is the Avengers in this scenario, then I am thinking of property taxes as Thanos saying all that for a drop of blood. When you're talking about sort of 175 about on the average tax bill, that's off of a tax bill of thousands. So does that continue decreasing over the long term, or what else does the legislature need to do about that?
Well, okay, now, and Sarah mentioned this first off, and I love your Avengers analogy because he's actually talking to Iron Man at the time, okay? So I remember the movie line, very well. Now, so what we set up is an automatic reduction on school taxes. So this is going to continue to be compressed. The minimum M&O rate was about 80 cents, 0.46. The next year, this will fall dramatically into the 70s. So we're trying to set up an automatic system that allows for more buy down and more expenditure of state funds to do this. And look, even like the Proposition 2 that everyone here voted 86% to raise the homestead exemption, the state paid for that. And this is a way to reverse what I didn't like was long-term Robin Hood policy anyway, because that was something that I spoke out against when I was a tax assessor. So at any time we can, at least from my perspective, I'm going to be putting state money in to get property tax relief on schools. Sarah?
So let me throw out maybe a frame that perhaps Paul and I can keep coming back to. I've represented some portion or all of Travis County for the last 20 years. So let's take a 4-person household in Pflugerville that is making, about $80,000 a year. If we can give them property tax relief this year that gets them, a couple of $100, that is super sweet. But if we can take this one-time surplus and invest in broadband, in transportation, in healthcare, in education, that family of 4 gets a much bigger dividend than a couple of $100 on their property taxes. That family of 4 will then have broadband so that they can work from home, perhaps a second job if they need to. They will have possibly transportation infrastructure, even transit, so perhaps they could get rid of one of their cars. That's a $10,000 increase to that household's income. They'll have good education and not have to send their child to private school. They will have good health care, and even if one of them loses their job and they fall below a certain income threshold, they may qualify for a short period of time for subsidized health care. If we don't make those investments in healthcare, education, transportation, broadband, that family of 4 has less opportunity, but they did get a $200 bump from their property tax relief.
Well, and part of this is that and this is why I really like the local government committee. You can actually, we have these discussions, okay? But to go back to your Avengers, let me do Captain America here, okay, on this one. Where there was actually a fight in Pflugerville 2 years ago. One of the problems we had with all the property tax relief legislation is we put it together and never thought that somebody would trigger a 254 countywide emergency. So the lowerings that we did of the rollback rates and all that were suspended. So we have to actually go through a period of time, a whole session, to pull them back together so we can get this tax relief system going. Now, Pflugerville's an interesting case because, let's see, Chair Dustin Burrows and I at the time actually were online with Pflugerville City Council to set, when they were setting their tax rates, and they were started off very high. And so we were saying, do better, encouraging them then. And it really came down to an interesting problem. They actually own a gun range in the city, okay, she knows, and they were gonna spend a whole bunch of money on the gun range, or they were gonna go to the lower tax rate. And I'm kind of going, guys, no offense, even for a Second Amendment person, the theory is that, that government shouldn't be really in that business heavily. And so they actually went to the lower number. But that's an example of setting priorities. See, the problem is, and look, we had a bill that came out of the local government. It was actually Senator Hinojosa and I sponsored. We had a school district down in the valley, La Jolla, that bought a water park and they bought a golf course, okay? And they were losing money on both, okay? So we passed a bill that said, you shouldn't be in the entertainment business. It's a school district, okay? So there's a lot of granularity here to talk about. So what I'm hoping this does, and because here's the big point, Josh, that I missed earlier, everything can be appealed to the public. If she was back as county judge and she wanted to go buy a new jail, or literally, she could take now under the law and go to the voters, like they did 2 years ago on the transportation issue, and say, hey, will you approve it? Lubbock County, shockingly, approved a sheriff's recommendation, okay? And that's the key part of this reform, is top-down guidelines, get priorities set, but if you need it, go to the public and ask for more. And that's a big part of the first ever change in the tax laws in 38 years that we passed in 2019. It's voter participation.
Right. So I want to get into a little bit of the priorities this session, but I want to start big here. Obviously, during the campaign, Governor Abbott, during his reelection campaign, said, we want to use half of this $27 billion surplus on property tax cuts, property tax relief of some kind. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick came out last week and said that the state couldn't do that without busting the constitutional spending limit. He proposed things like raising the homestead exemption, raising, no, not raising the homestead. Well, yeah, that is raising the homestead exemption.
That's the right deal. Raising the exemption means a cut.
Right. And there's a couple other things that he mentioned, but I wanted to get a sense from you, Senator, kind of are the governor and lieutenant governor at odds here? Are they just on different paths? Like how do you sort of characterize where these two are right now?
Well, I think I told Patrick Civitek that it was really a distinction without a difference because it's a slightly different path. But look, just to do the compression that's already in the system is $5.3 billion. The two proposals Lieutenant Governor was talking about, which was raising the homestead exemption and also raising a business exemption, could be equal to that again. So you're already in double-digit billions before you even get to the point of what does the constitutional cap do to you? Now, why we say constitutional is just important because this is a wonky audience. So, and Sarah's declared it so I'll tell you it. This constitutional cap has only been triggered 3 times out of the last 60 years. That's how much money has come in. And when you do trigger it, you can't say, like in some of our other spending caps, property tax relief is free. It doesn't count against the cap. So you have to look at all of that. And the one thing I'm not going to do is get out in front of the finance committee, new finance committee chair in the Senate or her counterpart, because that's the real discussion that has to happen at this point in time. You can effectively manage property tax relief with business and personal exemptions or compression of tax rates, but it all depends on what type of money is available.
It's just a game of chicken. Whoever blinks first looks weak on giving relief to the property taxpayer. That's what that whole mishigas is about. But I want to go actually to some of our other statewide leaders who are really speaking in an adult fashion about how we can use this unprecedented surplus. Glenn Hager came out very early and said with this more than $27 billion surplus, we should be investing in the infrastructure needs of the state of Texas, and he suggested that we look at water, wastewater. Dade Phelan came out and said very recently, we need to be looking at the ongoing needs of the state of Texas, what the demand is and what the increased costs are. And he suggested that we be looking at transportation infrastructure, at least at the increased cost drivers within transportation infrastructure, and lay aside money. And then I'll also quote Tatara, which I think Paul and I both have a lot of respect for. And Tatara in their 2022 Relief from Rising Values research report said it's going to take many years for Texas to become more tax competitive with other states absent additional infusions of state funds to bring our local taxes more in line. Right. So I think that Dale Kramer from Tatara has made 3 really good suggestions. It's in property tax relief in school financing where the state can have the biggest impact. I totally agree, Paul and I agree, that property tax relief is needed. There are 3 good mechanisms for that. 1, increase the base rate and index it so the state's contribution to public education doesn't erode every year. 2, increase the homestead exemption under school property taxes. It's currently pretty low at $40,000, and perhaps we should look at it being a higher flat dollar figure and maybe even a different flat dollar figure in urban versus rural areas.
Okay, well, how about 65,000 or 60?
I while I was Travis County judge, I think we increased the over 65 homestead, or over 65 exemption for county taxes to 85,000.
Wow, you were obviously ahead with a smaller budget.
Well, we had a growth rate. We
Right,
had
you
a
had a bigger
tremendous
growth
growth
rate, but she
rate.
could
And
have-
so we could afford to do that. And then the third thing that was suggested was and this was Kramer's suggestion, was a lowering of the percentage increase that could occur annually off of your appraisal. I'm a little concerned about that for this reason. Your appraisal is just the calculation of the market value of your property. And an accurate valuation gets you a fairer tax distribution. And so if we're gonna slow down the percentage increase, it needs to be for all properties. If we just do it for one type of property and not another, if you slow down the appraisal on commercial properties, that just means residential properties will pay more. If you slow it down on residential, it means the commercial properties will pay more.
Well, but the good news is that at least for the last session that I was at in town, apparently the actual cost looked like it's actually per home valuation is actually coming down a little bit again. And the market does self-correct. So part of it is that people see, government as the catch-all here, but really government's taking a snapshot of January 1st on 1 year, and a whole bunch of stuff happens in the other 364 days before it takes another snapshot. So as high as those moonshot appraisals were in the spring here, they've apparently backed off a little bit. So a lot of this has self-correcting, features just because that's the way the system works over time. But look, there's going to be more money. It's going to be X number of billions applied to property tax relief. I just can't tell you what the number is at this time.
I was going to ask you what that X was.
Yeah, well,
And also, can I chime in on the whole idea of
Sure.
busting the cap? The lieutenant governor said very clearly that he didn't want to bust the cap, but that he would look to the possibility of referenda on specific issues beyond the cap, because that's the voter-approved way to get there.
Right.
And I would suggest that referenda for investments in transportation, investments in education, investments in state hospitals, those are referenda that are likely to pass.
Well, I can tell you one that I think would pass there for sure, would be after Winter Storm Uri. I think that we need to look at one of the problems of the economics of ERCOT and the power grids type of here is that, and again, I'm not trying to make a political statement, it's just fact, because of the federal subsidies for renewables, it's a different game for them to then look at doing gas plant production as an offset. So one of the things that I was thinking about doing and maybe letting the voters decide is we could set up like a SWIFT fund and say, we've got this available amount of money. Would you like to build, would it help you get financing for gas generation? Now, I happen to know, I ran into Energy today. They've just brought on 2 gas plants into their area, which is mostly East Texas. And no matter what you need in a growing state, you've got to have more base energy load. Now, we might disagree on how to get there, but you've got to have a base load that's higher every year, because what we saw in Winter Storm Uri is that you're going to run into basically effects, and what happened in the spring too, where either a storm shuts down your electrical wind turbine grid, or obviously at night, especially during the winter, you don't do a tremendous amount of solar generation. So we have to look at balancing that. And I think the public would vote for something like that because they don't want to go through a freeze.
I agree.
All right, see, news. We broke news on property taxes and on the...
With one caveat.
Oh, she's got an amendment.
I've got an amendment.
Yeah, that's right.
That we be agnostic on energy source.
And you mean I've got to go to Catholic purgatory? What am I? That's right.
So am I just hearing, in order to get around the spending cap, if the ledge is not going to bust the spending cap, we're just talking about going to constitutional amendments on property taxes. Like what form does that take?
To try to summarize this in a little, basically, look, you can have what is a constitutional amendment. You put it before the voters, and you want to designate, $3 billion to set up a SWIFT fund to help build, 5 megawatts of power plants, great, whatever, then that goes to the public, okay, for a vote. That's actually the one piece of legislation the governor doesn't veto because it's got to be passed by 2/3 or can't veto, assuming he wouldn't, obviously, in my opinion, I can't speak for him, but be unlikely that would happen. But you can actually pass both houses, passes that out. Like for the property tax relief for both under 65 and over 65, those went to the public and the public will vote for it or they won't. And so I think there's going to be a lot of those type of propositions put on the table.
So when we're talking about property tax relief, like the big things that we're talking about, personal property tax, boosting that exemption, boosting the homestead exemption, like where is the focus going to be? Is it going to be primarily for homeowners, or are we going to see something that's maybe broader that includes commercial and might include, something that would help renters, for example?
Well, yeah, and that's why I've always been a big fan of tax rate compression. Because when those pennies come off your tax bill, it doesn't care whether you own, you rent. Because most people don't realize that if you're a renter in an apartment complex, it's not that you're getting a free lunch, you're actually being eaten for lunch, okay? Because that's what type of pressure is on when you have everybody in the world buying apartment complexes in Texas. And I mean, it's everybody in the world driving up values. So you'll see a compression, but the real point is you want to have a balanced plan, because basically tax rolls in the major urban areas are half where you sleep and half where you work. Like homes and apartments make up roughly half of the roll, and then all the other business concerns make up that. So you can increase business exemptions, and that's what's been put on the table by Lieutenant Governor. And again, that's a balanced package then for both both homesteads and business owners, because I think it wasn't in our committee. What committee where County Line Barbecue came in and testified that in town they can't hire anybody for less than $25 to $35 an hour anymore?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a well-known restaurant here that is under so much pressure. Forget minimum wage, it's not even on the table. They can't even get people to stay very long at $25 to $30 an hour. Now, when you hear that, well, because we do need to talk about affordable housing, okay, too, as well. These are important things that you've got to take into consideration on tax policy. But a balanced plan is always better than an unbalanced plan.
So for affordable housing, when you're talking about property tax policy, really the only mechanism that directly improves affordability for those least able to pay is a flat dollar homestead exemption. Percentage homestead exemption benefits wealthier people more and less wealthy people less. We can go into the math of that, but a flat dollar homestead exemption is better for low-income people. And I have a bill for a flat dollar homestead exemption. I'd love it if Paul would let me lay it out in committee.
You got a letter?
What's that?
Are you going to letter?
I'll think about it.
So flat dollar homestead exemptions are really the only mechanism to get to affordability for those least able to pay. With regard to affordable housing, broad stroke, the state puts in almost zero into affordable housing. So to give you a statistic to lay it out there, this is not out of my little brain. In fiscal year 2021, TDHCA expended $3,162,062,000 total funds in tax credit assistance. Tax credit assistance is a federal program. Of the entire budget for TDHCA, only 0.26% of that $3 billion was from the state of Texas. 0.26% towards affordable housing in the state of Texas. All the rest of it is federal or local investment. The way you get to affordability is by increasing housing stock. The state does not put any general fund into increasing housing stock. And if we went to a flat dollar homestead exemption for some of our other local governmental entities, we would be able to get to deeper affordability for low-income folks.
Well, you guys beat me to it because I did want to talk about housing affordability. Because, I mean, obviously what we're talking about partly with property taxes is an affordability question. So I want to get some sense of is the legislature kind of, I don't know if stuck is the right word for it, but I mean, the primary language that the legislature talks about affordability in is property tax reform, appraisal reform. And, I wonder if there's any sense or any feeling that the legislature would want to play a greater role in sort of the affordability crisis, or what mechanisms you see for sort of ameliorating that.
Josh, not only is there, we've actually had an interim charge from Lieutenant Governor Patrick to study, and we had a hearing.
I noticed.
Okay, right. Well, I did too, because there was an overwhelming number of people of Austin coming in complaining about Austin city government, okay? Now, let me explain why. Austin city government says that you have to have a minimum lot size, and I'm going from memory, of over 5,000 square feet to be able to do anything with affordable housing. Now, in my own hometown of Houston, it's 1,400 feet. Wow. You could build 4 little homes on one piece versus what happens here in Austin. And it just wasn't me. I mean, I was very surprised Habitat for Humanities came in and was complaining really about that, and also the fact the permitting process is like watching molasses pour. It takes forever to get a permit in this town. So I think a couple things that we're going to look at is we need to take a look at some top-down guidelines, because I don't want people, I don't want people forced into a solution that's a high-cost one because government says it has to be. See, that's what's wrong with this 5,000 plus foot cap down here. It's like, oh, we don't want to have any small homes. Well, no offense. I grew up in a small home. And now, but I've got suburban counties that are like saying, well, the minimum house size should be 3,000 square feet. These are anti-market, anti-growth, anti-reality of what it takes to get started in a home, okay? So I think we're going to look at those. Now, the other thing is I think we need third-party review, because quite frankly, if these cities and counties can't get a permit out in 2 years or whatever it's taken, then we should have an override position. Because look, this is now, and let me just say something, like in the city, last time I checked, I don't know, there's a mayor's race going on, so I assume this it's pretty much obvious. I think the town's 75% Democrat and 25% Republican. So, right. Yeah, so this is not a partisan comment. It's a reality that no matter what happens, you don't want to box out people trying to get started, because the county line barbecue problem is being exacerbated by a bunch of other restaurants that have problems finding people that don't want to take an hour and a half to get into work. So part of this is well, that Sarah will, we have a slight disagreement, okay, on some of these, but I'll push back that government needs to get their act together and stop having these falsely high percentage square foot starting positions, because it just drives up cost.
Real quick, so you're saying that it's possible that the state comes in and starts,
says
getting
here's some
onto these
top-down
minimum
guidelines like we did in SB 2 that say, sorry, you can't do this. Now look, because you look at Houston's success with it. Now, Houston doesn't have zoning. It has different land usages, but a 1,400 square foot place costs a lot less than a 5,500 square foot place, much less in Austin. And that's government needs to step back and get out of the way so people like Habitat for Humanities or anybody else can get the job done and start building some affordable housing.
I think Paul should run for local government. He's so interested in zoning cases that perhaps he should run for city government. But we're in state government. And I would suggest that, again, if the state were to pay its fair share, that would be the biggest property tax relief. If we waste our time and this historic moment with this large one-time surplus, bickering over zoning in the city of Austin, we will miss our moment. The remedy, if your local elected officials are not acting the way you want, is to go and vote. I voted. You have tomorrow. Tomorrow is your last day of early voting, and then next Tuesday is election day. That is a local election. State officials are not super constituents in any municipality anywhere in the state of Texas. We have state responsibilities, and we should live up to them. When we start meddling in local politics, it's because we are shirking our responsibilities and trying to divert your attention to something that is not ours to decide.
This would be the point of the committee hearing, I would say, may we move on? No, that's it. No, and look, the difference is, Sarah's expressed this in committee, we have a difference in philosophy. I think you have to have top-down guidelines. Because quite frankly, local government just doesn't work as well as it should. Now, under her—
Neither does state government.
Yeah, well, okay, but listen, no offense. I mean, John Whitmire and I regularly barbecue bureaucrats on the finance committee. If you walk in, you don't have your act together, believe me, you may not like what happens to you when you come out. And Josh, the reason with all this is simple. Look, it's what gets measured gets fixed. If you got a huge backlog in permits in your municipality, you're not doing anybody any good. You're picking winners and losers, because what happens is everybody starts getting phone calls, city councils start getting calls, everybody gets friends, they get favors, whatever else. Just get the job done. That's it. See, if we get that mindset, that also gives me less cost, and therefore we have less property tax. But you can come to any of our meetings and we'll continue the discussion.
I feel like you just had one. So about now, I want to open it up to the floor for questions. Anybody who wants to ask, where are the mics at? Or we'll start over here then.
Sorry, did you point to me?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, senators, for being here. My name is Pat Valstreyes, and my question is whether you would consider supporting a bill that would create a mechanism to provide state matching funds to counties that have a county-funded spay-neuter program that assists low-income people who cannot afford to spay-neuter their dogs and cats. As a point of reference, I'll just let you know that a female dog costs about $600 to spay. There are spay-neuter clinics all over the state funded with donations that do provide a little bit of money to help that, but they tend to have a 6-month waiting period, by which time a dog may have already bred. So
by which time the problem is already resolved, right? So
by that time, there's already been one litter born, and that creates and contributes to a state problem, which is the pet overpopulation problem. And since we have a system of government that has, state taxes and also county taxes, I was wondering if you would consider a matching program that would incentivize counties to put in about half the money, the state could put in the other half, and we would fund spay-neuter for low-income people.
Josh, can I pass as a former tax assessor to a former county judge?
No, you're really interested in being a city council member, so you should answer this.
All I want is your great experience, because you actually had that department work for you in the county.
So it's true. Animal control is predominantly funded and controlled by city and county entities. The state puts no money, to my knowledge. Pat, you would know better.
I think zero.
State has an animal-friendly license plate fund where if someone goes and contributes a donation, but when they buy their license plate, that money funds a little bit of spay-neuter, but it's a minuscule amount.
So a dedicated fund like that is really important. I would suggest that we do take a look at public health contribution levels at the state compared to how much is being paid for by cities and counties. Cities and counties are filling the gap massively, and the state is not. So I am in favor of looking at ways that the state can come in and alleviate that burden some, and certainly animal control is part of that.
Over here.
Jim McDonald, Pflugerville City Council member. I remember the discussion we had back on the budget with the gun range. The gun range line item was $100,000. We also removed, and this was in discussion with whether we would go with an 8% increase versus a 3.5% increase. SB2 had just recently passed, and we claimed some emergency contingency. I can't remember what happened in March in 2020, but during those discussions, we decided to cut the gun range, which is $100,000. I think $150,000 came from a capital parks master plan, which delaying that unfortunately put us out of compliance, and so we're getting caught up with that this year. $200,000 of that came from a transfer from our emergency fund, and another $200,000 came from revising sales tax projections, which, as we all know, those numbers come in late in the year, and they were oddly up in Travis County during that time. Everyone stayed home and made purchases at home instead of traveling to wherever else they worked. So yes, that was a difficult year. But that said, in the greater Austin area, we have a lot of very fast growth cities, a lot of fast growth municipalities. And we face unique challenges. Is the League interested in looking at some sort of, I don't want to say relief, but assistance for fast growth cities like Pflugerville, Cedar Park, there's others, in terms of making sure that our infrastructure keeps caught up with the growing population that we have?
There's a couple things that are interesting about that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because he literally, they had to set priorities, and it was a difficult year for him. But I also love the get up, so, ho, 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 and Merry Christmas to you too, okay? And so that's an important part of the decision making that you've got to go through. Now, there's some federal money that's in there looking for any type of lead-lined issues that has come out of what happened in Flint, Michigan. There's money in for that infrastructure right now. There's also the speaker, you didn't mention it, Josh, but he's talked about the transportation, because what I love about these great interviews, okay, especially with Evan coaching or them doing it on their own, one of the two, is that you'll have a difference between the speaker will say, let's talk transportation, the lieutenant governor will say, let's talk property taxes, and then the question is, well, but the property tax language is not the same between the other two, so it's always a fascinating game of ping pong. But to answer your question, yes, I believe there's going to be more infrastructure investment, okay? That's clearly something that's on people's mind. And we've got, very strong committee chairman in transportation, Robert Nichols, who believes in it strongly for once, and also a very strong water chairman, Charles Perry, that sits, closer. Or did you move, or are you just still on our side of the Capitol building, seating-wise? Sorry.
I'm still on, yes, I am the far left on the far right.
Right. Right, which is good, because I'm the middle right of the complete right on this, surrounded by right. Okay, that's right, where I sit. So it's a good question. Yes, I think the answer will be.
So, council member, you raised such a good point, and I also want to. This may be anticipating one of your questions about non-taxpayer approved debt. Didn't y'all recently decide on a CO for transportation infrastructure? And the reason why I raise it is because Paul and I, this is an area where Paul and I have a difference of opinion. He believes that all debt should be voter approved. In my experience, if we must wait for voter approval, our debt will be larger and more expensive, because we won't be able to take advantage of moments where we can get that project faster and cheaper for our taxpayers.
Thank you. Yes, our council recently approved a significant certificate of obligation in conjunction with our downtown east development for our new municipal building. In the argument there is it's like costing us $1.2 million per month that we delay this project, and so putting it off to a voter issue, which
Well, no offense, there was just an election in November. Why didn't you put it up for voter approval then?
I skipped a year in council, so I was from
Oh.
20, I didn't sit there from 2020 to 2021. I'm recently returned. So I can't answer for council actions then.
Okay, well, and Sarah, let me say this, without knowing that answer, I will tell you that there is, we did have a bill that put part of the certificates of obligation under Senate Bill 2, because people were using it for a whole variety of things.
And those people, if they misuse it, should be voted out.
Right.
Don't kill the tool because somebody misused it.
Well, no, but we didn't kill the tool because we only covered part of it. Now, I'll give you an example in Amarillo, because it was a stunning testimony.
It was.
Amarillo was presented, the voters of Amarillo presented a $250 million entertainment complex, which, by the way, you factor that up to Travis County or Harris County, you're looking at billions by comparison. Big project. Voters turned it down. Well, that city council decided they would do everything they could to go around the voters' turn down. So they ended up using COs with a combination through a TERS to be able to get a revenue bond to go build this $250 million entertainment venue. And a plucky taxpayer who came to testify in front of our committee laid it all out. He had gone to court, and a court not only sided with him, they voided all the contracts and looked at the new laws that we passed, because whatever you do, don't go around voter approval. Now, as much as I am an economic conservative, I wouldn't have voted for the big transportation property tax increase. I wouldn't have done it that you all did 2 years ago in this town. However, once you vote for it, you know, I've got to support it by saying the obvious, which is the public voted for it, and if they want it, they get it. But the real problem and what I look for is stop the wire rounds, because we had COs being put out for $100 million that were just pure bond money because they had lost votes of the public. And I'll do everything I can to stop that.
So I'm going to chime in on this because it's true. There are some people out there who do dumb stuff. And as I recall, those people in Amarillo were voted out the next election cycle. And that's the remedy. But there is still, that the tool was misused in that circumstance, but the tool is still good. And I will give you a couple of different examples. Travis County was growing in leaps and bounds, and we were out of office space. We had people who were literally 3-person to a cubicle. We absolutely needed new office space. An office building did not go on the market, but we were made an offer for an office building that was 15 years old. We could not go to bond before buying that office building because it would not have been available. And so we issued COs and we bought it quick. It was like a used Lexus. That building will serve us for decades. If we had to wait for voter approval, we would have lost the opportunity to purchase a used Lexus for easily a third of what it would have cost for us to get that kind of office space. Second example, we needed to build a courthouse. Deeply, deeply needed new courts infrastructure. We went to bond and we lost that bond. It was in 2015. We had costed it out in 2015 as a roughly $330 million project. We turned around in 2016, negotiated a public-private partnership on a different piece of property, CO'd it to secure the different piece of property, and it is opening next month for $330 million guaranteed price because we CO'd it. If we had to bond it, if we'd had to wait for voter approval for 3 more years, we would have been in the middle of the pandemic, and the cost of that project would have been at least 50% higher for the taxpayer.
Quick question before we go over here and wrap up. The Speaker of the House and Lieutenant Governor set aside $3 billion in federal stimulus for potential property tax relief. Is that still on the table?
I mean, it's still set aside. It hadn't been moved yet.
Okay. Over here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for making this last session entertaining, at least. I was a little worried about all the numbers as the end of the day. I'm down from Killeen. Texas, near Fort Hood. And I was just wondering if you could speak to how the various property tax options and the discussions that are going on may impact areas like Killeen that are already, where our tax base is already deeply impacted by the 65 plus and the disabled vet exemptions.
What she's talking about is that the disabled veterans get the same equivalent property tax exemption as over 65s. So when you have a high concentration, which you do in Killeen around Fort Hood, then you do have an impact to the tax base. I've had the senator from that area, Pete Flores, approach me so that he wants to come visit the committee. So we'll be looking at that issue too. And but I'm glad we've been entertaining.
I have a suggestion for you. And it's a little bit of a math problem, but here's the deal. I completely agree. When you increase your over 65 and disabled exemption for the county and the city, and you have a 3.5% revenue cap, that means a drastic reduction in your city and your county coffers. So what I would suggest that we talk with Senator Flores about, and also discuss at the local government committee, with this one-time money, what we could do for communities like Killeen is if they will do, if we're going to do a higher, let me back up for a moment. Right now, the only thing that's being discussed is a higher over 65 under school district taxes. But if we were to talk about—
It's actually all-age homestead increase, all-age homestead increase.
Yes.
Okay.
But if we were to talk about over 65 and disabled, an increase in the flat dollar figure for over 65 and disabled, we could use one-time state money to give a break to that taxing entity's effective tax rate for a year, use one-time money to buy the increment for that local community and reset to the higher over 65 and disabled exemption.
Well, and the only thing because that's her idea, the only thing I would change about what she said is that that's a 3.5% is not a revenue cap. That is a rollback rate reduction, which means you can increase last year's tax roll by 3.5%, but you get this year's new growth as well, all right? So it's not a 3.5% hard cap. So I didn't want to leave that with you.
And he's absolutely right about that. But you too are right that if you increase the over 65 and disabled tax exemption underneath this 3.5% mechanism, it does reduce your overall amount of revenues. So we could fix that if we're willing to use this one-time money to do a reset.
So what I'm hearing is, we got one last one.
Jim Brennan, I'm with the Texas Coalition of Veterans Organizations, legislative director. To this last question, we've worked the last several sessions on addressing the disabled veteran exemption in areas of the state with high population. And we continue to work with Representative Buckley and with the Killeen delegation over the last two sessions to try to come up with some formulas and some ideas to make sure that the impact is not disproportionate. And we're hopeful to be able to do the same during a comprehensive look at property taxes this coming session. So I hope we have a chance to visit with y'all.
Well, it sounds like Ross and David from the committee are going to expect to visit shortly. So thank you.
Good.
Okay.
No, so what I took from this is everybody's going to get what they want. Everybody's going to get property tax cuts. They're going to get increased spending, right? That's.
Well, that's a fascinating thing about this, Josh. Let me try to just summarize it and let Sarah come back with it too. When you don't have any money, okay, then generally everybody gets nothing, okay? So, and when you have too much money, the hard spending caps cut in, okay, and everybody gets nothing. No, it's a joke, okay? So that's, but when you look at this, the pendulum, when it swings that wildly, there's always issues on both sides. Because part of what you don't want to do is, for example, I think we had a bill, Sarah, I can't remember which way you voted, but we were going to put $3 billion into a one-year tax cut, which would have been about a 10 penny reduction on schools. It passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. But to keep it up, you'd have to do 3 billion, and then 3 billion, and then 3 billion, and then 3 billion. So after 4 years, that's almost the figure that the governor talked about. So you can have a variety of solutions, but you have to look at sustainability long term. And the fact of the matter is, those caps are there, I think, for a good reason, which is, you don't want to have I'm glad we're only here occasionally in session. I would not want to be in a place without a balanced budget amendment and be in session 24/7 for, 700 plus days, every 2 years. You would not like the outcome of that.
On the bill that Paul mentioned, I wasn't in favor of it initially because it was one time and not sustainable. Once it became sustainable, I voted for it. And that's where we are right now. Property taxes suck. I hate paying my property taxes too. Let's find a structural, long-term, sustainable solution. And that solution must include the state paying its fair share for statewide infrastructure and statewide concerns. I'm all for that. Let's do it.
I'm glad you changed your vote.
All right, well, that's all the time we got.
The House fixed it, and then I voted for it.
All right, well, we're at time. Thank you all so much for taking part in this. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for sticking with us all day. Appreciate it.
And thanks for the Tribune extending the gracious invitation.